Okay, all right, the recording is starting.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So we've managed to bring Gahl back in so he and I can do a little sample workshop. For those of you who volunteered to have your work looked at. And hopefully this will be really helpful to everyone who's watching because we'll do some kind of like model workshop exercises. So who is up first?
I believe we had
This is Gabby's
Gabby. Yeah, Gabby.
mission,
Right?
Spaghetti and Kassiopi. Okay, so I'll bring that up. Do you want to bring that up on the screen?
Yeah. Just so you guys know, what you're looking at is the screen of my laptop. We have this up so that you can sort of see kind of what the process is for annotating work as we go through, and specifically what my process is because my annotations are going to be through track changes, which might be a little bit tricky for people to follow if they're not used to seeing that. So I kind of wanted to have that as an explainer. So first we'll bring up just the clean version. And then May, did you want to do a first reading of this?
Yep, I'll read it. Okay. Eating spaghetti in Kassiopi. I wish I was eating spaghetti in my rouge bikini, not red rouge. I miss the hot sun and the booze, longer days when the light lasted into the late night and dry air hovered until the air conditioning pushed it aside like a stray cat. I liked that cat, foreign and unbothered. I wish I was in Kassiopi eating, swimming in the sea that seemed to me to be not a sea. How big does it have to be not a lake but the sea? I could see the bottom mostly, and the fish could see me. The out-of-season local men could see me too, wrinkled and prunish with dark eyes, as my sister tries to dive off the jetty, old and dark too. I miss the walk back after, the fresh olives and feta, the laughter, as Dad shoos the cat whilst we're all sat eating. Okay.
Hey, nice. And then typically, if you do a workshop, there probably will be read at least once, maybe by the author, maybe not. I don't know what experiences it may in academic settings.
I usually like to make the author read it.
Yeah, we obviously don't have that option, but just to give you a different sound, I'm gonna read it, and I'm going to actively try to take a little bit of an interpretive leap in terms of the reading to see sort of show you different ways that an audience can interpret the work. I'm imagining that in the academic setting, again, you're going to get a lot of relatively sort of monotone delivery, but there's actually a variety of ways that people can interpret what you got. So I'm going to kind of totally get theatrical with it. Is that all right? Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
This is Eating Spaghetti in Kassiopi. I wish I was eating spaghetti in my rouge bikini, not red. Rouge. I miss the hot sun and the booze, longer days when the light lasted into the late night and dry air hovered until the air conditioning pushed it aside like a stray cat. I like the cat, foreign, unbothered. I wish I was in Kassiopi, eating, swimming in the sea that seemed to me to be not a sea. How big does it have to be not a lake, but the sea? I could see the bottom mostly, and the fish could see me. The out-of-season local men could see me too. Wrinkled and prunish with dark eyes as my sister tries to jive off the jetty. Old and dark too. I missed the walk back after, the fresh olives and feta, the laughter as Dad shoos the cat whilst we're sat eating.
Okay, great. I think there's like something really valuable about hearing it read out, and actually, Gahl, I think your reading brought out maybe more actually of the way these line lengths work, the way there's kind of these little parentheticals and moments, like how big does it have to be not a lake but the sea? I thought was a really interesting, almost like Allen Ginsberg type moment, or like something reminded me a little bit of what's the other beat poet? Gregory Corso. He has this poem Marriage. This really reminded me of that. So I think there's actually something really nice about the line lengths that you can hear in this reading, and like the way the lines work with each other to create like a train of thought that then interrupts itself. So I actually think that's really nice. Okay, let's pull up the annotations then.
Okay. And actually, while we're on the subject, I'm going to bring up the annotations, but we're going to not talk about them for a hot second, just so I can show something. You talked about this idea of bringing out the aside, I think it was, and sort of a Gregory Corso.
Mm-hmm.
Students who maybe not getting the reference, this is a sort of slant delivery where we give the line, how big does it have to be not a lake but the sea? We sort of, like, my reading in that I agreed with May was kind of to make it sound like a parenthetical statement.
Mm-hmm.
One way we could like address that would be maybe adding in like an N dash or an M dash on both ends of the stanza, and you can see me sort of doing
Or
that
parentheses even.
now. Yeah, I mean, I personally have a thing against parentheses. I don't like it. I feel like it's a little too not sure how it feels about itself. But that's my own personal taste. Parentheses are fine. M dashes are great, but you can see that like they'll get added in that way. And before we go on, I have comments, as you can see. I also have things that I've written in, and I've put it in kind of these square braces so that it's very clear that this is me giving like a comment and not necessarily trying to do a suggested edit. If I was to do a suggested edit, it would show up in blue. One thing you'll also notice is that every box that connects here has an X. All commentary has X's. Things that I'm actually thinking about changing will be formatted. So I did it, for example, to show on the commentary here, the things I like, I first wrote it and then I tracked changes and then changed it to bold. And if I want to accept that, I hit check, it disappears and it stays that way. If I don't want to, for example, for questions I have as a reader, I can exit and it ceases to exist. So it's not really relevant for this particular poem because it's pretty short. But for some of the longer pieces, I might have deleted a word or two from your poem as a sort of suggested edit. So you might see something like that. And if you think, you know what, I want longer days when the light lasts into late night. I don't want to lose the word late. Just hit the X button. Anything I put out will disappear, and you're okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like, this is a really common editorial move. Like, if you ever have, like, when I have an article or an essay or a poem or something, and I'm submitting it to an editor, they often send this right back to you. This is exactly the method that most working editors will use. It's like the track changes Word document thing.
Yeah.
So it's good to become familiar with those mechanics. And it's a good way to kind of fiddle around with your own drafts as well and see like what kind of edits you do or do not want to keep. Okay.
I also wanted to make one more note, which is why I'm typing note 7,000 times into this comment bar. I'm not doing this for any fun reason. This is just for a technical reason, which is that if you sort of extend out of the reach of the margins, what will eventually happen is that your notes will end up being like abbreviated or ellipsized. It's taking a little bit too long to do it in this document. So what I'm actually going to do is probably open another document where I have left excessive numbers of comments. And what we'll do there is you can see just how to open that, just so it's clear. So I'm going to open really quickly, I think, Verity's work. We're not going to talk about any of the content there. But I think I get a little bit crazy with the notes here. It wasn't a different page. Maybe not. Yeah, here we go. So you can see here we have like half of a sentence inside a comment box, and then there's this sort of like 3-dot looking button. You click on that button, the full comment will appear in the side, and then you can read it and see what happens. And then on the same token, as you can tell, it kind of like emphasizes it on the text. So you know that the sentence, "I love to play Tetris," is what being commented on. So you'll be able to see that in your own notes if you get them from me or from other teachers later on.
Perfect.
Okay, so back to the fun stuff. All the notes. Eating spaghetti and Kassiopi.
Gahl, you managed to make it sound like you're in like Oklahoma or something.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We'll go through these real quick.
And I want to. We also, I bet you that without looking at Gahl's notes, we can come up with very similar takes on some of the lines, which might, which may or may not say something about how likely a reader is to kind of have the same reaction or have the same needs.
Yeah. So yeah, just sort of going down. The first thing I started to mark up were things that I noticed that caught my attention, and then I'll mark them sometimes because I like them, sometimes because I'm making a joke, because I think it's, you are talking to a real human being, and it's nice to remember that and not be too overly distanced from them. You're already distancing them from the work, and the more that you can like try to treat them like a person, the better off you're going to be in life.
And also, this is like a process by which some people will respond to certain things. Like, it is a personal process. Reading is a personal process. Certain things will stick out to certain people. And so I think it is useful to kind of mark yourself as a reader and not God, even your editor, is not God. So if you're submitting a book or something and your editor comes back with things, it's always useful to see their personality as well.
Yeah. And I think like it lets them know that like, you're engaging with it as an actual fan. I mean, not that you have to be a fan, but like, yeah, you should be enjoying what you're doing. Otherwise, why are you doing it? So yeah. Anyways, we're eating spaghetti with Kassiopi. The first thing I marked for me was the not red rouge line, which I do so love. It's a great line. But the first thing that popped out of me is because I'm reading this, and from the title, I know Kassiopi. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be pronounced. Maybe it's Kassiopi or whatever. But that sounds to me pretty Greek, right?
I think it's Kassiopi.
Kassiopi, whatever.
Kassiopi. Yeah.
But to my ears, right, that does not sound French. So I don't know if I need to zoom in on the comment here, but it says, wait, really though, like what is the difference between red and rouge? Why are we making the distinction? If this is Greece, why are we speaking French? Is there something I want to get across? And this isn't necessarily something that the writer has to answer, but it is me in my reader brain. I have a second where I'm like, am I missing something? And I want to note that for her. Like that's my in the moment reaction. Next, we have I liked that cat, foreign and unbothered.
And I love bothered. That's my note here. I really like the use of that. I just like the way it flows. I like foreign and unbothered. And those are like two different types of things. If it was like red and striped or something like that, those are both visual. But foreign and unbothered are like two things that don't always go together. They're two different types of adjectives. So I feel like that's really nice. Like normally and we'll get to multiple pairings of adjectives later, but it's nice to have that. I liked foreign and unbothered. But what did you think, Gahl?
I'm totally in agreement with you. It really takes what was kind of a pretty simple metaphor and then fleshes it out and kind of lets us linger there. I was just joking. I said, I don't know if this cat is real or metaphorical, but either way, it is definitely being exoticized. We have to know that it's a foreign cat. It's not an English cat. But like, the fact that even it elicits the joke or whatever is because it's got some spiciness to it. I'm enjoying it. It's giving me pleasure as a reader. Now we move forward. We say, I wish I was in Kassiopi eating, and we don't know what. I want to know what you're eating.
I have this. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's also because we're both from immigrant families. And I'm like, what are you eating?
Well,
if you're bringing up a vague thing like that, it's good to ground it at some point. We want to know like what you're doing. If your mom is like washing a shirt or something, we want to see that. We want to know what she's washing. If she's doing the washing, it's like, okay, she's washing a shirt. Now we have like something.
Yeah, and even to put it outside of the context of immigrant families, there is a relevant question to an English-speaking audience of a place that is clearly not from an English-speaking country. Are you there as a tourist? Are you like picnic basketing your own, foods? Did you bring spotted dick and fish and chips, or are you actually eating what the locals eat? Like there's a political relevance there that will deepen the poem.
And we have spaghetti in the beginning, so we get some sense that maybe it's a family situation.
Maybe, or spaghetti could be what they eat in Greece. I have no idea. I mean, I'm uncultured American swine, so.
You're in Japan. Okay, all right.
Yeah. So swimming in a sea that seemed to me to be not a sea. And my
wait, before you scroll, I want to guess what the comment is because I bet I know.
Yep.
My comment would be like, if not a sea, what is it?
Bing bong.
Sorry,
that's Japanese. Bingo. Yeah, side note to all of your listener, reader people. I live in Tokyo, so I have sometimes slip into Japanese. It's not on purpose. But But yeah, that was literally what I was saying. It was like, what if it's not a C? What does it seem like?
I mean, not a C, but a. Like that's the moment where we get to know what it seems to be.
Yeah, and specifically because you're saying like this class, if I'm not mistaken, is called Finding Your Voice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is by definition the part where the authorial voice comes into play. Even if you're just talking about like an abstract metaphor, what one author chooses to say, not a sea but a lake, or one person says not a sea but a glass of orange soda, like that really is what defines your style and your voice as a writer. So I'm gonna be constantly urging you guys in all of your work to make more specific choices, and kind of force yourself to pick something, and to be as non-abstract as possible.
There's a good. I uploaded. I think this should be in week 9 or 10. For some of the materials that I uploaded, there's some extracts from a book called "Writing Down the Bones." As it's a PDF, and it should be like a scan of like a kind of slightly yellowed book. And she has an entire kind of set of pages in there on specificity, on answering the questions that you pose, on not being ambiguous with your language. If you ask yourself a question, answer the question, things like that. So here, it's not framed as a question, but it's kind of a question because you're opening up the sea that seemed to me to be, and then we're like, what did it seem to you to be? So answer the question and try to be as decisive as possible, make choices, and kind of commit to those choices. Okay. Next comment, maybe.
Yeah. So how big does it have to be not a lake, but the sea? So this is actually me just getting on my
pedantic.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing: is that like I wanted to put it in because I think it's illustrative of things that are going to be very specific to a particular member of the audience. I think there are people asking questions about what are the types of comments that I can ignore and what are the types of comments that matter. So it might not matter at all to a British audience. I am from the great state of Michigan, which, distinct from the rest of the United States, has the distinction of having the 5 Great Lakes around it, which is the largest source of natural fresh water in the entire Western Hemisphere. And every bottle of bottled water comes from those lakes. So we have a really big sense of identity and pride in what a lake is. And so, like I specifically said here, seas are made of salt water, lakes are made of fresh water. It's not a matter of size. I grew up an hour's drive from a lake so large that it has tidal action and waves and extends past the horizon. So as a reader, I personally, would get alienated by this idea of even confusing them because I could never confuse water that you can drink with water that you can't and will make your eyes burn. That said, it might be something that your audience doesn't give a shit about, and that's totally okay. And just recognize that that's particular to one group and not another is valid.
What I think is interesting for me about this utterance is initially I was on the same wavelength of being like, well, it's not really a matter of size, is it? When I went back over it, and specifically when we read it aloud, I started to like it because it felt to me as if that was a really truthful thought that you kind of plucked right out of the speaker's head. Like as she's experiencing this moment, she's thinking, how big does it have to be? And I felt like putting it as a parenthetical or as an aside in dashes or parentheses or whatever starts to create that feeling, that kind of feeling of like reflecting, and the voice, like this is like a moment where the speaker's like saying this to herself and being like, how big does it have to be? And so I actually liked it. There's like little moments in the first 200 pages of Ulysses where Leopold Bloom is starting to do some like really silly inner monologues that this reminds me of, where he's like, and then what if machines did all of our jobs? Then what would happen? But then who would build the machines? And I thought, like there's these little moments where you just see someone thinking like right in front of you, and I thought this was a good example of that.
Yeah, and I also think, there's also value in it, even if it does piss off a reader. Like, I think like that's a form of engagement in and of itself. You can purposefully say things that control the reader a little bit. So that might be valuable, like just on its own terms. But yeah, I agree with you. And this is kind of a nice thing to point out the importance of reading it aloud. Until we did the sort of performance bit of both of us reading that, it didn't occur to me to think of it as an aside. which is, I think,
When you
why,
just look at it on the page, I agree, it doesn't jump out that way. But when
yeah.
you're reading it, you just feel it as a commentary.
Yeah. So it's sometimes nice as part of the editing process. If you're not doing this already, guys, try reading your own work out loud and see if there's anything that maybe getting across in your tone of voice that you could then translate into your writing.
Mm-hmm. I think also even one M dash would do the job, just interrupting it somehow, interrupting the flow. I think I would, if I were, I like that. I like that the best, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of decision that ultimately the writer will make, right? Maybe she wants to use parentheses and like, I'll hate her forever and you'll love her. I don't know.
But anyway, yeah, there's just something about having that break or that aside that I think really works.
Yeah. I mean, this is also a thing where if we wanted to get like really...
Put a little tab.
Yeah, we could indent
I knew you were going to do that. I knew you were going to do that.
You know, almost as if it's like conversing with somebody else and just justify it. I think that could be another way that you could play it if you wanted to go really out there. And
yeah, and there's like a lot of ways to like make the visual represent the flow of the poem, and I think that's an important thing to look at. Dinez Smith has this interesting piece called Broken Rice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got, I think that should be like on his Instagram even, because he's been taking photos of his print poems and putting them up, so you can really see them everywhere. It's just got like a lot of internal spacing, which gives it the impression of like a kind of scattered field of rice, and I really like that. So you can always mess with like the margins and the lines and punctuation and everything else to try to give it the effect that you want.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's nice that we have this left alignment in general, though, because that's kind of like the standard. So if we're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. We kind of have like this baseline that we have at the left alignment that then gives us the freedom to move around and make changes, and then it sticks out to the reader. Yeah, sometimes I see people where they kind of let the thing flow all over the page, and like it looks cool, but like it's harder for me to tell if they're emphasizing individual lines or words that way.
Like something like Mallarmé.
Yeah.
But anyway,
okay.
Let's go on.
So on to the next one. We have I could see the bottom mostly, and the fish could see me. The out of season local men could see me too.
And I think we had the exact same comment on this, which is that makes it sound like maybe they've expired or.
Yeah. Again, because I love my lame jokes, I said I've been told that one shouldn't purchase local men if they're out of season because they're liable to be unripe.
I mean, I know what it means, that they're not doing their seasonal work, but it does have, there's like a slight kind of other meaning as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that they were doing seasonal work so much as I thought that it was an implication that the speaker was there during the tourist off season.
Oh, that might be right. I mean, okay, so maybe we don't know what it means. Maybe you've got to, maybe there's a choice for the writer.
It could be that the men are returned from being tour guides or whatever, and this is just them, they're living their lives.
It could also be an out of season in the sense of like youth and age, but I don't think that's what it means. I think it probably means something more practical, but it does have that kind of extra layer. Yeah.
Then we have wrinkled and prunish with dark eyes. What do you think?
Okay. Prunes are wrinkly, so pick one would have been my guess.
Yeah, I'm 100% on the same page.
And so this is kind of the opposite of foreign and unbothered. Wrinkled and prunish is kind of like you just did two of the same thing, so you really kind of condense it into one. That would be my pick whichever one you think gives us more.
Yeah, I was gonna say this happens pretty often where I'll find a draft of a poem, usually an initial draft, that will have two competing descriptions for the same idea. And in all of those cases, I would always say let the one that you like more live and let the other one die. Because when you have two, neither of them makes much of an impact because your brain is trying to juggle both concepts in your head at once. Or in this case, your brain is trying to figure out what a prune looks like without wrinkles, because why else would we include it as supplementary information, right? And that parsing is what we're actually aiming for. The part we don't want too much of your brain to be based in trying to decode from grammar or from the situation what the author is trying to tell us. We want us just to be
just enough to make it fun.
Yeah. And then we have with dark eyes, as my sister tries to dive off the jetty, old and dark too.
Okay, so we had some difficulties with that, with the old and dark too. I have a reading, but Gahl, why don't you tell me your reading?
So my reading was that the sister is also old and dark, uh,
Okay.
which I love. I think that's hilarious. So I just said, "Oh snap! Shots fired."
I was under the impression that this was sort of grammatically meant to refer to the men, and it was just kind of
Well, because it's a two, right? So like either the men and the sister, or the men and the jetty. But I'm choosing to believe it's the sister here. You know, because who cares if a jetty is old or dark? That doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I'm saying like,
yeah. No, we've got it. I
yeah,
think yeah. I had understood that as some wrinkled and prunish old and dark too. In other words, referring back to the men again. But I suppose that is again like just retracing wrinkled prune. I mean, a prune is also dark. It's a bit old if you compare it to like a plum, I suppose.
right.
So we kind of already got all that in a prune. I mean, prunes are also something we really associate with age. Um, so it might be like, I would say normally it'd be verging on a cliche, but I think there's something maybe more vivid about it in this situation because you're dealing with not just the fact that it's um, wrinkled, which is like the main kind of cliche feature of a prune, but dark, which I think is a nice kind of more immediate way of thinking about a prune, as well as like the food that's come up several times might make it a better choice. I'm not completely not mad at the choice to bring in a prune at this point.
Well, and this is where I'm actually enjoying my completely different interpretation, because if the sister is being described as old and dark, I'm going to take it for granted that our writer is not overly obsessed with her skin color, that the reference to her being old is her being older and maybe not as carefree, and the darkness is something that, like, you know, she's obviously dealing with some shit that the writer is just not. She's on fucking vacation mode right now. Pardon my French to all your students. Right? But like this idea of like old and dark is like, I'm not shouldering whatever burden there is in the outside world. That's for her to deal with. So I'm really digging that there's that sort of encroachment on this, even this beautiful memory of this darkness in the sister. But again, not actually part of the context of the poem. You know, whatever. You do you, I guess.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking old and dark to refer to the sister. If it does, I kind of like that, but I want more guarantee in the poem that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that part later. I want more of everything. I want more of the sister. I want more of the men. I want more of the moment. But yeah, yeah. So on to the next comment. Before I think this is the final, and we'll get into the sort of post. What's the word for it? Postmortem, is that the word?
Postmortem, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have fresh olives and feta. You want to take a guess at that one?
Finally the food. We know what they're eating.
Yes, that's one like verbatim what I said. Oh, that's what they're eating. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's good that we answered the question, but I would love to know, you know, back where the line first showed up. You know, like it's fine to put it in there and then have a callback later, but like no reason to have me in suspense for, you know, half the poem. Just tell me from the beginning. Yeah, and then all these rhymes that I actually didn't notice until we read aloud, but I like that. The laughter as choose the cat.
There was a lot of really nice internal rhyme. It was loose. You know, like a lot of times we've been saying, like in the dull dozen, it's like try to avoid the end rhymes, try to avoid. But I think that's generally what we're trying to get you not to do is go da dump da dump da dump da dump da dump. That's like the main thing.
You just no sonnets in Amaze classes.
I mean, you know, you know, we can do some trochees if you want to do like da dum da dum da dum da dum. It's more difficult. But I think, you know, like when you're writing your first work, like, I mean, I used to write tons of sonnets as well, but you just don't want it to have this really plodding feeling to it, you know. And I think this managed to have like a nice loose rhyme scheme. I was
Hello?
and is it kind of a kind of a, let's see, if
All right,
we sort of go
for 1
spaghetti,
second.
bikini, rouge, booze. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm trying to see if there's like a loose rhyme structure here.
Yeah, so Azame looks for the loose rhyme structure. I think she brings up a good point that we kind of were jokingly referring to. So with form poems, those rhyme schemes that they have are pretty fixed, and the idea is that similar to the visual presentation, which we were talking about before, it creates a standard sort of rule for the reader to follow, and that way, if anything breaks that rule, it draws attention to itself.
Right. We've got like a sort of loose A, B, B, and then we've got a C, D, E situation, which makes it kind of nicer. And then G, G, but the G's there would be the same word, C. And then G, 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 C, C, me. So I think there's something nice about that.
Yeah, and I like that it's not all end-line rhymed either.
Exactly. Yeah, that there's some internal.
The shoes the cat while we're all sat is kind of a nice little hep jazz feeling. But yeah, so that's what the postman. The first things, the things we like. We got onto the rhythm now because that's something I noticed more when we performed than when I was just reading it to myself. But I love the descriptive details. I love the food. I love the AC that we got in there, the air conditioning, the shallow waters that she's wading through.
It's really nice to have something like air conditioning too, because you can just feel it.
Yeah, it brings in a sensory detail.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we have that.
You couldn't get in a picture as well, which I think is really important. Like when you're writing, getting things that writing can do that no other art form can do is like something that I love to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we have a little bit of each of those. We have fresh olives and feta, so we have that taste. We have the feeling of the laughter, which is more of closer to the touch, but feeling of that breath inside. Some of the heat and the stifling heat that we get in there, like that we got to with the AC as well. So there's some touches there. In terms of the things that I have questions of as a reader, first one, why spaghetti, right? Because that's the title of the poem and it never appears in the poem. So I'm curious. Why rouge, as we said before? What's special about the bikini? What kind of booze? Because it's a big difference if you're talking about like having a beer and like if you're taking straight shots of tequila one after the other.
That's really cool, actually. I think booze is here. It's rhyming with rouge, but I think you're missing maybe the opportunity to give us a more evocative detail.
Yeah.
By choosing to go with the rhyme instead. So there's choices that you kind of have to make. You might want to stick with booze just to keep the rhyme, but you might also feel like, if you're drinking, what's that really, oh my gosh, that Greek liquor that's like, anyway, whatever, but
Or yeah, ouzo.
Yes, ouzo, it's so good.
And ouzo would fit the rhyme scheme, just saying. Slant rhyme.
True, that's true.
But yeah, so that, and then like, this is the thing where these animals appear in the poem, but all of them are generic. And I want to know, what color cat do we have? What kinds of fish? Since it was literally alluded to, were you swimming in salt water or fresh water? Because that's a totally different feeling. What color was the water? Because these times can sometimes be gray, green, blue. Were there waves? How old were the locals? And legit, what does out of season actually mean? How old is the speaker in this memory? Is this someone being 13, 18, or 25? Or 50 maybe? What is the context for this leisurely summer? Is it a family vacation? Is it a semester abroad? Is there, this is more psychological, but is there an exhibitionist pleasure present in the fact that the locals are able to see the speaker, like she likes being seen in the rouge bikini? Or is this a situation where there's an explicit connection? Are these men leering at the speaker? So is there something where there's like an explicit sort of sexuality being either requested or put forward? And what drives their looking? Because it might not be sexuality. It could be envy. It could be contempt for the youth, or for like that first worldness. And how would the speaker feel about it if that were the case? And then again, this is where my specific interpretation comes in, right? How and why is the sister old and dark? Because I'm super curious. How did the speaker feel about the oldness and darkness of the sister? Again, I'm super curious about this. And when we talk about missing the walk back after, we jump to fresh olives and feta, but you're not eating fresh olives while you're walking back. So I want to know what exactly you're missing about that walk back. Is it
walk?
Is it something you see?
What's the walk? That's true,
Yeah.
because we get nothing about that.
And where the hell are they walking back to? Are they going to a hotel? Are they going to a train station? Like, I have some sense of the setting that they're swimming, but I don't know if they might even just be walking back from the lake to the beach. I'm like, I want to get that bigger sense of scale. That comes down to suggestions for future revision. This is the third thing I put for all of you guys, and I think it's what May asked for everyone. The even better ifs. So I'm just going to read it straight out. This is good, but I always want more, 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 more. Answer any or all of the questions listed above. I don't usually say that for questions I have as a reader. It's only for pieces where I feel like, what's being done so far is good, but I'm hungry as a reader, and I definitely feel hungry with this. It's a great thing to whet the appetite of your audience. So give us more details, more scenery, more feelings. And while we did mention that there are some of the five senses, most of it's still visual. And I would like to hear more scents. There's no scent at all right now. I would like to hear more sounds, more touches.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to know if the sand on the beach is coarse or fine. I want to know if the water is cold or warm, because that's a big difference.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to know if there's a breeze, because that makes a big difference when you're outside. Is this a situation where the speaker's pretty cool, or have they been sweating all day and they have that like oil layer on top of them, so when they get into the water, they're finally like cleansed? So yeah, just feed me, Seymour, feed me.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back in and comment on something else, like about the form, or maybe the desire for what's here in terms of maybe like a slightly shorter form. Mm-hmm. So like the question would be, if I were the writer at this point, I might be being like, well, there's something graceful about the shape of this right now. It's kind of elliptical. It's not very long. How can I cram all this stuff into a short form? And I mean, one thing to say is you just got to experiment. You got to answer all these questions perhaps like separately, and then figure out which ones you can kind of put in at opportune moments. The other thing to say is you might get an entire poem out of just one line in what you have now. Like this interaction with the men, for example, that could really be an entire poem on its own. Or this walk back after, which we know nothing about. I think that could probably be an entire poem if it's important enough that you're kind of gesturing to it. So you could make quite a lot of these kind of condensed scenes out of the material that you have here, and still keep that kind of style if you want it to be short-ish. I mean, I would say this is a mid-length poem, but if you want it to be like kind of one page or less.
This is, I mean, you say it's mid-length, but this is definitely short. These aren't even.
I'm thinking of like micro pieces as well. I sent some examples of like micro poems that are like 8 words or something,
Yeah,
because we're looking at haiku as like the short poem. But no, I agree, it's a shorter poem.
Yeah.
And you've got your epic on the other end. But I think if you want to keep it like short and sweet, there's like a lot of things you can do and still take some of these suggestions and try to think about like what to work in and what not to work in, and what can then become potentially. I mean, you're more than allowed to have like 5 poems about the same thing but approached from different angles, and I think oftentimes that's what you end up doing as a writer, returning to the same things over and over again that really speak to you. So you're very much allowed to kind of take different episodes in this, or have this be like one poem and then have other poems that talk more specifically about certain things that happen.
Yeah, to give a really self-centered example, I once was like physically assaulted, and
you talked about this in the interview, didn't you? This poem.
No, this is
to be a white guy with a black eye.
No, it's not that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wrote that poem, obviously. But the police requested that I take photographs of my face every morning, because they had fractured like some bones in my face. I had like a pretty bad black eye. And I was basically requested to photograph my face every day so they could document it as sort of like evidence, physical evidence of me having been injured in the assault, because by the time they actually caught the guys and brought them to a trial, it would be, maybe a year later. So I ended up doing sort of a series of ekphrastic poems, which I think May's also read.
Just the mugshots sequence.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like 15 different poems, and each poem is only a single photograph, and it's just about that photograph. So like that moment in that time on that day. You know, and I'm not trying to even retell the whole story of being mugged. You know, I'm not trying to retell the whole story of the police. I'm just talking about how I am feeling at the moment that I'm literally taking the photograph, and from what is physically present in the photograph. You know, and those poems are all, I think, less than a half page, so roughly the similar length. Visually speaking, probably you can fit 3 times as many words if you're not using line breaks. But yeah.
You mean like double spacing here?
Yeah, double spacing, and I mean,
no line breaks.
This is at 100. Yeah, even just it's double spacing, and it's also with the line breaks that it has right now. Like, in my rouge bikini, not red rouge, right? Like that's
3 words.
Yeah, it's like 6 words, and we've moved 3 lines down the page, almost a third of the poem through that. So like that's one of those things where it's like if you specify, you'll have more room to play.
I do think maybe we can talk about line lengths at another point. I'm gonna stop the recording now, just so we can get to everyone, because it's taking a decent amount of time, but it's worth it. So I'll stop this now, and we'll have other recordings.
Okay.